And today you're in for a big treat. We're going to go into a juicy, juicy topic about holy relationships and special relationships and the difference between the two, and also look at it from the context of a bit of like life coaching and psychotherapy, the different kind of therapies that are out there. And that's something that my guest is Alex Gill, very dear friend of mine. We've done a podcast on her show, and she's come onto Restream here for me to share on the platforms that I share with. Welcome, Alex. Thank you for gracing us and gracing me with your presence.
Thank you, David. So good to be here. So good to be with your audience, sharing a very important, I think, a very important conversation today about relationships, because I believe there's so much confusion there. And I'm speaking this confusion, even speaking of myself, because I come from the background of a lot of psychology, life coaching, and I'm a big devoted student of the Course in Miracles. And the more I understand special relationships and holy relationships, the more I kind of not disregard, because I think there's a place for every teaching, for every psychology book out there, but it's kind of, once you understand the concept of holy relationships, you don't need to read any other psychology book about relationships. And yet, I think those books have a place, those teachings have a place as a bridge to bring people maybe into Course in Miracles. So I want to be that bridge with you here. What a beautiful vision I have of walking this bridge with you, and hopefully through this conversation, help a lot of people to get clarity in this place that it can be so beautiful and so joyful. It can also create a lot of suffering, a place called relationships.
Beautiful. Well, it's beautiful that we can take this time. Originally, you were from Brazil and now living in the United States. And with the topic of relationships, of course, people watching know that it's the direct experience that of moment by moment relating that really shows us. We read it even in the course. We're reading the teachings and we're getting all the kind of pointers from Jesus, especially those 9 chapters between chapter 15 and chapter 24 on special relationships and holy relationships. I know people who have said when they've gone to retreats about these topics and these chapters, they have to order in the kitchen. They say they have to order 7 times as much food because people want to stuff their faces when they're reading about these. The resistance to holy relationship, and we'll say the exposure of the tactics of the ego with special relationship is a real sharp area, and the ego is highly resistant to these teachings. But maybe we can start off by saying, I think you said too, you had a relationship too where you got to look at the witnessing of your mind in kind of an extreme way, with a deep sense of love and care and compassion underneath, but also sometimes the spirit's use of relationships, they're more like assignments where you go through a period of time, seemingly lots of stuff comes up, and then you have to have some kind of an insight or a lesson. And sometimes that lesson even involves a stay or go thing. It's not like there's a preset idea that things have to go a certain way or have to look a certain way. We were learning that. And then your questions, I think, when you wrote to me, I thought, wow, that's fantastic. You had a talk with Carol Howe about special relationships and holy relationships, and just your background of using psychology and coaching. It's more like you're just interested with all the curiosity in your mind. Like, okay, let's get to the bottom. What's the bottom line here?
What's the bottom line? So let's start with a big question. The big question, so data shows us, and I know relationships is, we always in relationship, but let's bring this in the context of more of what we call intimate relationships. 50% of marriages end And I just heard today that in California, 75% of marriages end up in divorce. So we can, say that there's a big crisis. And to me, it's like, yes, it's obvious. And at the same time, it's not. And that's what I want to shine the light here for a lot of people, because I think it's a topic that brings so much confusion, because I see the psychology going from one old paradigm to another new paradigm that is another ego structure. In the Course in Miracles teachings is what brings us right in the middle, like the Tao, right? Lao Tzu was very wise. Like there is a middle way that is not here or not here. So, David, from your view, why it's so hard, why we're in this tremendous crisis in relationships? It's people suffer, people get into depression, and many people even giving up the idea of being relationships because of all the hurt they have. So what's really going on here in the bigger, let's start with the big picture.
Well, the big picture is, the bigger context is that our perception of this world and our perception of linear time and the cosmos is a mirror. And Jesus has really taught us that it's a motion picture or a mirror, and perception is a mirror, not a fact. And I think part of the devastation and the crisis feeling is from taking the physical world, which is a projection, but taking it as a fact. So when you talk to somebody about marriage, they take that as a fact. Maybe there's a lot of lifelong kind of ideas that are tied in with marriage and promises and commitments and so forth. And then when you talked about 50% marriages ending in divorce, or in California 75%, the breakups and the divorces are seen as a failure of an ideal. So we could say that everything in form, as long as it's on the timeline of perception, that it's just a motion picture of beliefs. So everything you think and believe and feel is acted out in the world that has been called reality by the human beings. But to Jesus, he's basically saying, he even says in the Course, you have a two-tier self-concept. There's the dream that you dream in secret, he says, which is what psychologists like Freud and Jung and so forth call the unconscious mind. And then there's the dream that you gave away, which is the projected world. So in the projected world, it seems like there's cause and effect, and there's joinings and breaking up and making up and all the gyrations of that. But those are all just projected outcomes of the belief in separation. And basically it's the dream that was given away. So it seems like it's being done to you. I met someone. Oh, we're in relationship. We're in relationship. We crossed that invisible line. now it's a relationship. It's a friendship. Now it's a relationship. It was dating, then a friendship, then now it's a relationship. All these things that are taken for fact are really not facts, but they are just images and interpretations. Many years ago in the 1990s, I was with a group of students, very devoted students in the 1990s, like around 1993, 94. And we were reading A Course in Miracles, going through it very slowly. And then Jesus had a line in A Course in Miracles that just says, no one can be angry at a fact. Well, the students were like, what does that even mean? No one can be angry at a fact. They said, we have no clue what he's talking about here. What does it mean, no one can be angry at a fact? And I said, well, it's just a statement of an accurate declaration. They said, well, what's a fact then? If no one can be angry at a fact, and I said, God is a fact, Christ is a fact, and Spirit is a fact, and no one can be angry at a fact. If you knew the fact of the matter, you would not be capable of being angry. You would only feel love if you knew the fact. But the world is not a world of facts. It's a world of perceptions. It's a world of illusions. And when we're looking for love in those faces, in those situations and places, we're actually looking in the projected world of darkness to find the love, which Jesus said the kingdom of heaven is within, the kingdom of God is within. So we actually are looking, it's a misdirection. We're just looking for the divine, eternal, everlasting love in, maybe we'll call it romantic relationships. And Jesus has said, you have every right to experience love, but you're just looking in the wrong direction.
I love that answer. And right away, it resonates so much because not until that long ago, I was that person seeking that salvation. In a way, we're seeking for somebody to save us, but I was looking for love outside myself. And again, it wasn't that long ago that I had a moment of miracle where I was in deep meditation and I literally felt that I was the one I was looking for. And truly, it's God. I was looking for God, and made me realize at that moment that the truth is everybody's really seeking for God's love, but we're looking in the wrong places. And that's, it seems like, where we create a lot of drama, because that's a lot of responsibility and burden to put in another human. We wanted them to save us. We wanted them to heal our childhood wounds. We want them to prove us that we can trust love, so they would never disappoint us, because we're so disappointed, start with mom and dad and past partners. So no wonder a lot of relationships are not working, because we are looking for this special one to be our salvation. And people might not say this consciously, but I can say that I was doing that. Now that I'm able to see the bigger picture of my own life, I totally see, as I remember reading Course in Miracles, when I was reading about guilt and how I was projecting guilt into my relationships, into my partners. It was a moment that I had to pause, and I'm like, oh my God, that has been me. So it seems like we all have mastered special relationships. We master ego-driven relationships, and no wonder there's so much drama in that. So that will, let me shift here into a little bit of the psychology. So it's interesting to watch what's been happening with the psychology of relationships. We went from one place of where people didn't speak their truth. Let's say they didn't speak their needs. They were just suffering quietly in relationships. So then I think psychology took all this material and created this new material that is all about, let's set boundaries. Let's learn how to ask for our needs. What are the 5 red flags that show you that you're dating a narcissist, and so on? If you follow a lot of dating coaches or relationship coaches on social media, you know what I'm talking about. So what I see, my perception is that we just took one ego structure, and psychology is creating other ego structures, because now we go to these relationships, as even Carol Howe spoke about. We go into these relationships with these big lists. Is this person going to meet my list? How, can I ask for what I need? So it's still this format of going to relationships so I can meet my needs. So let's talk a little bit about that, because at the same time, in this physical form, we can say we have needs for affection, have needs for listening and understanding and support. So how do we come to that middle way, like I was speaking earlier?
Yeah. Well, let's just say that the entire world of the ego is a belief in separation from God. So it's a death wish. And one of its principles is scarcity, or we could call it lack. Or in relationship terminology, not enough. If we just put it from scarcity, lack to, the belief that I'm not enough. I'm not worthy of the love and so forth. So that's really good, because that's exposing that as a belief system. But then we start to realize that Jesus is saying, well, when you believe in the ego, you do believe in lack and scarcity, and you perceive the world based on your belief system. So you perceive a world that's lacking. And this is where all the relationship, we'll call it codependencies, come in. One person who by definition has forgotten the Christ and forgotten eternal love, eternal oneness, is kind of in some sense a walking belief in scarcity or lack, because the world is the projection. So people come into relationships from a sense of need. And when that is the motive to get your needs met, most relationship psychologists and psychiatrists would say, of course, that's your baseline. That's going to have to be dealt with. And so with A Course in Miracles and opening to be a miracle worker, you start to realize that the miracle is what truly meets that need. Or as the Beatles said, all you need is love. In Course in Miracle Tomb is all you need is miracles. You know, because Jesus is saying we need to be consistently miracle minded. Each day should be devoted to miracles. He even says miracles are natural. When they do not occur, something has gone wrong. So he's clearly saying, you can talk about God and love and oneness and revelation if you want, but practically speaking, miracles help shift your mind, and they work with the symbols that the ego made up, including humans and men and women and interpersonal relationships. That miracles are on an interpersonal level. He also says that we're all the humans are on the same level. So we can call some teachers, we can say some are students, we can say some are not interested. Jesus said, yeah, you're teaching and learning all the time through these interactions. You're really starting to get a closer look at your mind. He's saying when you believe you're here in this world, you don't know what equality is. You don't know what oneness is for sure, because you have amnesia about the kingdom of heaven. But even at the interpersonal level, you're so into hierarchies and preferences and who's superior and who's inferior and who's dominant and who's submissive. And of course, Freud and many psychologies have given us a lot of the dynamics of the ego. Mm-hmm. Now, in A Course in Miracles, Jesus says the ego doesn't really have dynamics because it's not real. So how can something that is a belief have dynamics? Dynamics are like active things, like defense mechanism things. But Jesus is saying, at one point, he even says the ego enjoys studying itself. So we can see that a lot of psychiatry and psychology it's theory. It's taking a stab at explaining and describing the mind and human nature. With A Course in Miracles, Jesus is transcendent. He's literally transcended the ego. Be of good cheer. I've overcome the world, he said 2,000 years ago. So he's basically saying, now I want you to open up to holy relationship. But holy relationship is the highest teaching learning goal that you'll come upon in this course. Mm-hmm. So it has to be carefully taught and learned. It's going to take enormous amount of practice. You might even have multiple assignments. He tells us in the manual for teachers that he starts off, what are the levels of teaching, is the question for Jesus. And in the manual for teachers, he said, well, there aren't any levels. That every single relationship is a perfect opportunity to teach who you are and learn what you are and to forgive. And then as soon as he said there aren't any levels and that you can't really understand with the belief in levels, then he comes right out and he gives levels. Like it's almost like you're going for something so high that I've got to give you some levels so you can relate to what I'm talking about. Meaning the interaction, some two people bumping into an adult, or people in an elevator. He gives some examples of what we would call just fleeting interactions. Mm-hmm. Then he gives another level and he says two people come together for a fairly intense teaching learning situation and then seem or appear to separate. He's describing a relationship formation and a breakup, whether it's just a breakup or a divorce. He's defining that in the second level. And then he says the third level is very rare, where one is given a lifelong teaching learning partner. And he says these are very rare. And he goes on to say that that the two may be hostile to one another, perhaps for life. This is in the lifelong. And when for anybody who's got a soulmate wish, and Jesus is like, oh, there's, oh yeah, lifelong, lifelong, and then they may be hostile to one another, perhaps for life. Whoa, that just blows the soulmate idea out too. But what he's saying is basically we have to change our belief system and our thought system so completely that we let go of judgments and we let go of expectations. We let go of the timeline and we come to the holy instant, the present moment. And relationships are used by the Holy Spirit to release the false and accept the true. It's deep, though, because as long as the mind is believing in this linear time, it's going to project its expectations, its preferences, it's all of its judgments. It will project them onto the world. And as we know with, we'll call it intimate relationships or significant other partnerships, that's a lot of close mirroring. And it gets very, very intense when the blame game starts or the abandonment game starts or you rejected me. Those kind of ideas are so deep in the unconscious mind that they play out sometimes on a daily or weekly basis. And people are like, where's the fun?
Yeah.
in
So
that?
let's go right there, David, because now I want to start bringing more into you did so beautifully, like bringing really the big picture. Now let's narrow down to make this practical for a lot of listeners. You just spoke let go expectations, and you spoke about, we start hitting this place of, oh, I feel rejected, or I feel neglected by you, or I feel like you're not paying attention enough. So I know there are a lot of people in this situation. I certainly have gone through that not long ago. So how do we start reorienting? And if that is the mirror. So how people in this situation, how do they start reorient themselves from special relationship to holy relationship when they are being triggered? So from the eyes of psychology trauma, we see every trigger as something that it's you are carrying. It's not your partner. You always upset. That's what I love. A lot of the trauma healing language matches what is in the course, which says you're never upset about what you think you're upset about. And that matches trauma healing 100% with that I own that trigger. If I'm constantly feeling rejected, first of all, we say we can be rejected as an adult. So if I'm constantly feeling rejected, it's definitely something that I'm carrying myself, and my partner is simply triggering that. So that, at least for me, it's a bridge towards holy relationships. But let's say somebody's really in this place of not enough, not feeling loved enough, feeling rejected. How can they start doing this work, maybe even inside the container of the relationship?
Yeah, let's just say somebody has been to therapist and the therapist has said, oh my gosh, you have huge codependency tendencies.
Yes.
You are looking outside yourself and you're just going from one person to the next, trying to have them meet your needs. And you're looking for a father figure or a sugar daddy or a provider or something like this.
Perfect.
But your question is really is you can't go from an egoic belief system into zero expectations without a bridge. And that's what you're asking me for. Let's have a bridge here for the majority of the people that are watching. Let's have some bridges here.
Yeah.
And so let's talk about something like setting boundaries, or I hear that a lot because I've been traveling the world, 44 countries, and you better believe they're bringing up all their relationship stuff. They're like, give me some metaphysics. Okay, now here's what's going on in my life. You have a few hours because I need your ear for this. But they'll say what about setting boundaries or setting healthy boundaries? In many psychological models, this is a very positive step. Although the very word boundary tends to be associated with limit.
Yes.
And if I'm going for ultimate freedom, what are healthy limits? Again, I rephrase it and I say, well, what if I reinterpret these setting healthy boundaries into having intuitive, preyed upon, shared agreements? Let's talk it that way. Let's use that phraseology instead of setting healthy boundaries. Prayerful, intuitive, we'll just say agreements, shared agreements. And that's the way I've had to extend when I've traveled all over the world. Groups are asking me, how can we get along? Couples are asking me, how can we get along? Families, children, sometimes, and parents coming to me like, oh my God, this is a nightmare. This family is a nightmare. They say it's totally dysfunctional. And I'll say, well, why don't we just start from the core right here and right now and see if we can come up with some shared agreements. For example, I counsel one couple, they're mixed. One is the husband's Jewish, the wife is Catholic. They come from completely different family systems, seemingly in this world, completely different religions, and they don't want to talk about any of that. I said, okay, what do you want to talk about? Well, the wife's like, listen, I don't have the huge libido. I'm praying, meditating more. And honestly, I am not looking at every corner to have sex with my husband because it's just where I'm at. I just want to be honest about that. So I say, well, okay, to the husband, what do you feel? He's like, well, it's like, I think that's a basic need for me. And it's like a wifely duty. And, I'm okay with a bare minimum of 3 times a week. And she's like, it's, then she says, it's not just that, the expectation around 3 times a week. But it has to be for you, her husband, to be on a specific day because of his occupation at a specific hour in the afternoon. So it's like, she said, it's scheduled. It's not just 3 times a week. It's scheduled 3 times a week. She's like, I can't do that. So here I'm talking with them, and you can't just go to all is God, all is one,
right,
holy instant, the present moment. So I'm saying, well, let's keep talking here. I'm talking with them, and then I say, let's look at the expectations, and are you willing to open up to a shared agreement around this topic where you both can intuitively feel, okay, I'm willing to give this a go and try. And then I work with them, and then he says, oh, I'm sorry, it's so scheduled. And she's like, yeah, if it at least if it was more spontaneous, I'm willing to be open. You could see both of them giving ground, so to speak, by saying, I love you and I want to make this work, and let's talk and communicate, and let's pray together and have a shared agreement. Now, those shared agreements, of course, are temporary, and that's the other thing. When people have shared agreements, as you shift in consciousness and as you start to expand your awareness and open up toward the light, there's going to be lots of shifts. And so there has to be a lot of communication and a lot of transparency, a lot of disclosure, a lot of the things you were talking about that psychologists are saying are very helpful. And it's just kind of retranslating the healthy boundaries talk into the prayerful, intuitive, shared agreements. You see, it's from a positive context, not from how are we going to limit each other,
right,
and set up boundaries, to what can we agree upon. And not only with relationships, I've been involved with many different spiritual communities around the world, and there's so much communication that goes on even in the community, because there's a shifting happening. There's a growth, the spiritual growth that happens, and sometimes shared agreements, they kind of serve their usefulness, and then they have to be discarded, and then new shared agreements can come in. But you see how flowing and flexible that is, that it's making room for growth and for expansion. So that's the terms that the Holy Spirit and Jesus have used through me when I'm practically talking with couples or communities, families. That's what I'm looking for. shared agreements.
That's a beautiful bridge from boundaries that sound very structural and rigid to intuitive, shared agreements. It seems like even the energy, as I say those words, feel way more free, way more open than boundaries, or because boundaries sound so like it's going from a almost like a one business contract to another business contract, basically.
Yeah, yeah.
And then there's like this rigidity that in a lot of relationships do become more like a transactional business transactions. Hey, I done all this for you. What are you going to do for me? So much. And maybe a lot of the relationships are crumbling, are collapsing because we are shifting. I want to believe truly that we are shifting consciousness as collective. And as part of that, relationships are also shifting. And what is not true, it's not staying anymore. It's dissolving.
Yeah, yeah. And I also, like yourself, I have a great appreciation for fields of philosophy, psychology, education in many different ways. And I went through training in psychology, both in undergraduate school and in graduate school. And so we study the various tradition, the stimulus response, the B.F. Skinner kind of thing, and then the Freudian, unconscious id and superego, the moral voice of society, and the ego mitigating between. Then I kind of evolved more into humanistic psychology, resonating more with Carl Rogers and Virginia Satir and basically Abraham Maslow, so forth.
Mm-hmm.
Then carried on more when I started to get involved in the course back in 1986. I was actually at a humanistic psychology conference on the West Coast near La Jolla, California, and there were transpersonal psychologists, the fourth wave, that were there. Roger Walsh, Francis Vaughn, they were married. Two transpersonal psychotherapists together about transcending the ego, that the purpose of relationships is to transcend the ego, transcend the limited small self, and go to the grand larger self of our spiritual identity. So I was really in touch with all of this. And I would have to say too that the higher you go in consciousness towards the light, what you start to see is the perception of relationships becomes drastically different.
Yeah.
The higher you go towards that we'll say the mountain or the top of consciousness. Let me use some examples for you, because a lot of times people say, well, that sounds good. I would like to move in that direction, but here's what I'm dealing with. Recently, in the past several weeks, I've come across a few articles on Facebook, and one of them was from Kim Ang, who is the partner to Eckhart Tolle.
Mm-hmm.
And Kim was saying, well, when she travels, people are coming up to her and saying, what's it like to be married or partnered with an enlightened being? And Kim was saying, actually, that's not the most helpful question, because there's a lot of assumptions that go with what's it like to be a partner, significant other of an enlightened being. And basically, she took it herself, and also in the article with Eckhart talking too, to basically say that ultimately there are no interpersonal relationships, and there's only the present moment. That's how far she went with it. It all comes down to the present moment and our relationship with time. And it doesn't have anything to do with partners or enlightened partners or anything like this. It ultimately comes down to the present moment. Then more recently, someone sent me a link, and it was Byron Katie and her partner, Stephen, and talking in there playfully about how when they got married, Stephen, her husband, said to her with kind of half jokingly, very lightheartedly, let's see if you can keep that ring on your finger for a year. Uh, See, this is what I mean by a very, very different perspective on relationships, because that would be unheard of in a typical marriage. Let's see if you can keep that ring on your finger for a year. And then she said shortly thereafter, wasn't very, maybe a couple months later, she found herself taking her ring, sliding it off her finger, and putting it onto a male friend of hers, and giving it away, only months after after being married, and after Stephen saying, "Let's see if you can keep this ring on your finger for a year." And as she slid it off onto her male friend, gave it to him. He said, "No, no, I'm not. I can't take this." And he gave it back to her. So she still has the ring, but it wasn't that she didn't try to give it away. Byron Katie, what love, what unconditional joy, what wisdom. Turn it around, turn it around. She's so into the giving and the sharing of love that even in this context, which would seem extreme, I know a lot of people would just shake their head like, what? She did what? Stephen was playful even at the beginning, and then laughing at it when it came back to her, like, oh, you still got it. But you see, it's taking it away from the pressure of trying to keep the form in a certain way to using everything that comes up. And I think Stephen's just written a book on forgiveness, and she was using the platform to say, oh yeah, he's just, how beautiful when we use the relationships to give and extend love, and we practice doing it more and more unconditionally, meaning without the reciprocity, without the strings attached. I'll do this for you if you do this for me. Of course, that's the way interpersonal relationships are, but Jesus is telling us through the Course that if we hand them over to the Holy Spirit and say, use it for your purposes of forgiveness, it's a way of clearing our mind of the ego, of emptying our mind of these judgments. And how beautiful that is. So I give those two examples for people who may need some role models, we'll say, for people that are really living in a very, very high state of mind without the possessiveness, without the control, without the deep sense of woundedness and hurt and rejection and abandonment that typically, of course, comes up in interpersonal relationships as far as the human race. But these are like role models of it can be different. There is another way, and it's worth going for it. You know, it's great to have role models that mirror this love and acceptance and inclusivity. That's what I see Byron Katie and Stephen and Kim Eng and Eckert. They're just great role models of love is inclusive. Love is not exclusive, as the ego teaches. It's actually inclusive. It includes the whole universe.
Oh, wow. We need a radical remodel of this whole concept of marriage and relationships, because what you're saying is like you meet your beloved in the present moment. In the present moment, you don't need to create definitions of, are we committed? Are we gonna get married? Or we're gonna, you basically say remove all the structures or the constructs and just meet your beloved in the present moment without seeking for the guarantee, because it seems like going back to what I was sharing in the beginning, we wanted that salvation. It's almost like we wanted that guarantee that that next person, that next lover is not going to leave us or hurt us. So it's almost like we want to have that marriage. We want to have that ring on the finger, because that's a promise that you're not going to change and leave me, which of course is impossible. Look what's happening. Look at the numbers.
Yeah. We have to start to laugh at it. You know, I remember
What we do. Yeah.
there was a few years ago when Beyonce came out with a song, if you like it, then you better put a ring on it. If you like it, then you better put a ring on it. Oh, 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 oh. And it was just a beautiful music video some years ago. But it's very much like professional sports players. It's like, you like my skills, you like my abilities, you like team owner, you like what I do for you. Lock me up in a long-term contract. Just give me those zeros, and I'll just ink it, and you can just sign me up. And not only I want a long-term contract, but I want a guaranteed long-term contract. If you cut me, if I'm injured, if anything happens, I still want the money. Kind of like the old movie "Show Me the Money" with Tom Cruise. This is show me the longevity, show me the future guaranteed contract.
Yes.
And of course, this is the model that we've dealt with on planet Earth. Is it's contractual. It's very contractual. It's very legal. It's not just, you were saying 50% or 75% divorce rate, but there's lawyers involved. There's lots of, letting go of things, assets, splitting assets. There's not talk of forgiveness there. It's talk about how do we split the assets? How do we split the property? I had a friend of mine years ago in the early mid 1990s, and he was a lawyer, and he dealt with people. A lot of people came to him for divorces, and he was a very devout Course in Miracles teacher and student. So one time I visited him at his house. His name was Richard, and when I went into his office, his law office, he said, "Yeah, they come in. Here's the seats where they sit, and they come to hire me in my services to go through a divorce process." And then I point to the forgiveness sign behind me. I think it was "Forgiveness is the key to happiness." And I go, what a front. Jesus is using you as seemingly a lawyer, and they're coming in there to enact a divorce, and you're talking about forgiveness. And I said, wow, that's a good use of how the Holy Spirit can use what the ego made to always bring us back to forgive, to let go, don't hold grievances. Use prayer and guidance. Even if people decide to go their separate ways, pray your way through it. Another friend of mine you might know of, Gary Renard. I knew Gary and his first wife, and basically they came to a point where they were saying, it feels like we're to get a divorce. And when I talked to him, he said, well, we had lawyers, and the lawyers were going back and forth, how it goes, trying to get the most for their client and this and that. And then finally he told me we just went to their favorite restaurant. I think it was in New England, and I don't know if it's Maine or wherever it was. They went to their favorite restaurant, and they basically sat down and they talked each other in very loving, respectful tones, like let's join together and find what's the best for us. And then she said, well, what do you think? And he wrote some things down on a napkin, slid the napkin across to her at the restaurant, their favorite restaurant. She X'd out a few things, slid the napkin back, and then they said, okay, great, we move on. Even that's a shared agreement. You see, even what could be perceived as a divorce doesn't have to be a battle. It doesn't have to be a competition. It doesn't have to be maximizing assets, but it's actually through prayer. And I've seen many people I've worked with over the years who really pray together on that decision, and really feel an intuitive shared agreement that comes to both of them mutually. And then they can hug each other and go, thank you for all the lessons we shared. And there's a gratitude. It's a parting with gratitude. You see how different that is from the ego's view of contracts, breaking contracts, adversarial. The ego is always very competitive and adversarial. And that's just, we don't have to buy into that anymore.
No, I love that so much. I'll share a little personal story that happened with me recently, where I was involved with somebody in a romantic relationship, and we came to a place of agreement that we needed to go separate ways. And what I shared with her was it. I share, like, in the old paradigm, we will call this a breakup, but there's nothing breaking, because the love I feel for this person is so unconditional that I said, that love doesn't change. That my love for you doesn't change at all, because that is truth. And what is truth is unchangeable. The only thing we're changing is the agreement that is going from what we call a committed relationship to now a friendship. That's all. It's changing. So there's no breaking up, because our love is unbreakable. And it was a moment of like, wow, that's a very different paradigm. Because, and not to say that there's aspects of me that still felt hurt, disappointed. I even dropped tears. So I want to share this personal story, because we can have both. We can still have, I believe, a human experience, which is all of a sudden I was seeing my future. I put time. I was seeing my future with this person. All of a sudden, not anymore. So in that process, there was sadness, there was grief, and I allow myself to feel all that. But it's a very different experience when we feel that without any blame, versus when we're creating stories and blaming and going back to that scarcity mindset, which is, if it's not this person, I'm going to be alone. But it's a very different experience. And still, there is an emotional, I guess, process that we go through when there's change in agreements and relationships. And like you said, we can do, if we really apply these teachings, we just can do everything with so much love. Because if you really love somebody, just because they're making a different choice, their love shouldn't change.
Yeah. Oh, that's so beautiful. That's a great example of a big stride towards holy relationship, because Jesus teaches in the Course, let all things be exactly as they are. The ego doesn't even know what that means. It's like, what? It's got so much investment in outcomes and future, and it's got so many ambitions and preferences that it doesn't really know what all things being exactly as they are means. In the Bible, it said all things work together for good. There aren't for those who love the Lord. In the Course, there are no all things work together for good. There are no exceptions except in the ego's judgment. So it's really saying the same thing, but we have to start to see that relationships, we'll call them interpersonal relationships, are assignments for letting go of unconscious guilt, assignments for letting go of unconscious fear. What are the issues that come up? Oftentimes rejection, abandonment, betrayal, the core things in all the Shakespeare plays that
Yes.
Shakespeare was constantly writing about. And he was very wise to put them in there. He wasn't trying to skip over anything, but he was just using, we'll say, the sonnets and the play and the theater to help himself go through a healing. Because he had a wife that lived in a different town, a daughter that he was kind of estranged. He got so into writing plays and sonnets and having his own theater that basically became his life, his career, his literary career. And he basically didn't see his wife or his daughter very much until his theater burned down. And then he went home. There it was for Shakespeare, William Shakespeare. It was all the unconscious stuff came flushing up with the daughters, with the wife, and that's how it goes. So we shouldn't get too negative and down on ourselves, too harsh. We shouldn't conclude things about ourselves as being unlovable or unworthy of love, because we're all doing the best that we can based on what we believe, and much of that belief system is unconscious. So we're not even aware of it until in the relationship, the triggers start coming, the fear, the abandonment, the aloneness. I need more from you. I want more intimacy. I need to be more nurtured. It's the ego tends to put it out onto the partner and say that if you were different, I would be happy. And then the ego wants to change the partner. And Jesus is saying, you can't change the world. You can only change your interpretation of the world. Your interpretation of your partner is what's being healed. It's being opened up. So then it's all good. Like everybody's just doing the best that they can, you know. No need for blame. There's just
No,
no need for it.
no. In my opinion, is the most unproductive state we can ever be is the state of blaming, and especially blaming the self, which is very common. And I see the root of all this drama is the sense of scarcity. It's both. It's if we bring the two biggest stressors of people's life, let's say money and relationships, I believe the core problem is exactly the same. It's either I don't have enough, there's not enough money coming, and I am not enough, or I don't have enough love. So it's the same place of scarcity, which to me now is so clear. It's like the veil has been lifted from me. It's like it's the biggest lie of all.
Yeah, that's it. And I love how open and willing you are. I mean, we've come together and joined, and then you've come together with Carol Howe, and I like it that you say, okay, I'm a coach, a life coach, and everything, but even during our interviews, I'm sure with Carol and me, there's a lot of things that come up, things that you have used, even you believe you've used successfully in your practice, and then after the interview, the next day or week, you're going, wow, I'm going to be out of a job if I keep talking to these. If I keep opening my mind that fast, I'm going to be out of a job. I just talked with a friend of mine. We talked, and it was like all these mystical experiences that this friend has had and gone through so many things of from a very horrendous childhood to becoming very successful and having so much money and properties and things, and then giving it all away, having a St. Francis, Mother Teresa moment, getting a strong case of Mother Teresa-itis, I call it, and then giving it all away, and then still this, I want to give, I want to share, use me, use me, use me. And that's the journey. That's the fun of the journey, to open ourselves to how the Spirit can really use us in a very impactful way to release this unconscious guilt. That's all we're really doing, is we're not really trying to make the world a better place. We're just trying to release these unconscious guilt feelings and fear feelings.
Yeah. And what a gift when we meet somebody and we see the mirror that they're showing us where we have these places that we might call attachments or grievances. And what a beautiful reflection, because I wouldn't know it was there until there's a reflection in the beloved showing me where I'm holding guilt or fear. And I just see so much fear being expressed in relationships. So a big thing, that I see people talking about these days in relationships, Dave, is this trust. How do I trust? Can I trust? And there's a big conversation these days around safety that is almost like our responsibility to make our partners feel safe around us so they can be vulnerable. So, and I can certainly understand that. So let's talk a little bit as we might be coming here to the end, this issue of trust and safety for people as they go into relationships, how they can resolve that.
Yeah. Well, there's a workbook lesson, even in A Course in Miracles, that Jesus gives. It says, I trust my brothers who are one with me. And sometimes people reach that relationship and they go, no. Jesus, if you knew my history, you would never, ever say such a thing. I trust my brothers who are one with me, meaning trusting all our brothers and sisters. But I think what happens is we're starting to become more intuitive, but we have to realize that with a split mind, we've been both analytical and intuitive. Mm-hmm. That Jesus says the ego analyzes, the Holy Spirit accepts. You can see the difference of energy there. The ego analyzes, the Holy Spirit accepts. So we've had a split mind. We've done a little bit of both. But as we start to become more intuitive, we're just willing to line up with our intuition, with spirit more and more. Then that starts to build a confidence. And I would say that's where the trust really is. We're just learning to trust our higher self. We're learning to trust our intuition. We're learning to trust that small, still, intuitive voice. That's really where the trust is developing. And as that happens, then we draw forth witnesses to our brothers and sisters. And we start to feel a bond, a loyalty, like, oh, that's a real good friend. That's a trusted one. I can open up my heart. They won't judge me. They just accept me. They tell me they love me even when I'm going through my darkness. Then those are more and more we draw forth witnesses, I'll call them, of trust. So it's not saying that you should, by a fact, just try to trust the form, because Jesus has said that which is born of the flesh is flesh, that which is born of the spirit is spirit. Where am I really developing my trust? It's in the spirit. It's in the guidance and the intuition feelings I have, and those prompts and nudges from the spirit. That is very healthy. That takes it away from, like you said, if you're afraid of being partnered up with a narcissist and you're constantly getting your notebook out and looking at the symptoms and behaviors of a narcissist, then already you're coming from a place of fear.
Yes.
You've got your checks and your boxes there, and you're like, listen, we're not going to go out on a date until we sit down and we talk first about this. And I want to hear all your tendencies. I want to hear all your passions. It's like an interview. I want to hear everything. I want all the dirt from the past. I'll look at my notes then, and I'll see if we have a first date. Because I'm not going to get involved with another narcissist. That is coming from fear. And Jesus is saying, why not practice with the miracle of coming from that place of willingness to connect and love and trust, and let that grow through encounters, drawing forth witnesses to that love and that tenderness. And that's a healthy way, really, I think, to build trust. But Jesus says in the Course that in the development of trust section, that it's usually a pretty slowly evolving process, and that he has a whole section on development of trust. He doesn't just say trust, he says development of trust.
Yep.
And there are people like Eckhart Tolle that have those park bench experiences over in England that are so radically transforming that they can't hardly function in the world because they get such a big dose of light and illumination. But those are very rare. For most human beings, it's a slowed process of development. And we have to be kind and gentle with ourselves. We can't be harsh on ourselves for, I should trust more, or I should have trusted this person. That's just second guessing ourselves, and it's more self-judgment, self-criticism.
Yeah. Wow. I can take this to many directions, but I want to say it again. What you said about the ego analyzes and the Holy Spirit accepts, resonates so much true to me, because and if I go back a little bit to this frame, what I see a lot of people struggling, and I struggle with that myself, is this place that, okay, I accept this relationship might not be for my highest good, for my growth. And yet we can see and feel, and I'm helping a client right now caught in the addiction of the body. So the spirit is guiding, say, this might not be a person for you. And yet the body is so addicted that it's like, but I wanted that person. There's something that's still for them, right? And a lot of times, if people end up going back to those relationships, clearly they have some lessons to learn with that individual. But I can see where people get caught in the struggle because they do hear the voice of truth, and yet the body creates, they're in a split, basically, and that's where a lot of the confusion is created. And I'm sure a lot of people are going to be listening to this and relate to this split that they have between what they know is truth, and yet they're not listening.
Yeah, that's what I think makes waking up requires such persistence and determination and devotion, is because Jesus tells us in the Course that when you believe in the ego, which is the belief in separation from God, when you believe in the death wish, in this world you will be attracted to death and attracted to guilt. And that is something that, we don't really get. We can get from Freud's teaching that there was this guilt and this shame that just played out in terms of sexuality and very strange, distorted ways. But what Jesus is showing us is that the attraction to guilt is the ego using its projected world to trick the mind to go for things that really aren't helpful for its peace of mind, but actually will perpetuate the guilt. So you mentioned with people, the addiction, the attraction to certain kind of characters, certain personas, certain forms. People have said to me, like, I was married 5 times, David, and I kept attracting an alcoholic. What are the chances of attracting an alcoholic 5 times in a row? And I say, well, from a Course in Miracles perspective, it's the attraction of guilt. It's the subconscious mind and then being drawn or attracted to things that aren't necessarily helpful. They are helpful as mirroring, but not for release. You have to actually follow the Spirit's guidance to let certain things go and break the pattern, break the loop of time. In the end, it's a time question, as we talked about on another episode, that basically eternity has no sense of time. Eternity means forever, always. But linear time was set up by the ego, past, present, future. I just showed an Einstein movie where Jesus was saying, through Albert Einstein, past, present, future are an illusion. And Jesus talks quite a lot about this in the Course, which is basically when we're addicted, it may seem you're addicted to a certain personality or a certain trait or a certain pattern, like alcoholism, drug addiction, but it's actually the past. The mind is caught in a loop like Groundhog Day, this looping, repeating the same mistakes until it becomes aware of what it is, and then it says, no, thank you. I'm not going to go through that again. I don't need to. I want the miracle. I'll choose a miracle instead, and that's the release. That's the freedom.
Beautiful. So Dave, let's finish with this, like giving the audience a little bit of a framework here, a little bit of a map. So the people who are either in a relationship, in an intimate relationship, or this can be also with friends, family, anybody, any person that might be triggering you, let's say, or even just people that want to start dating, meeting a possible intimate partner, what kind of guidance would you give to them to start really moving towards holy relationship?
Well, instead of coming from the perspective of what does this person have to teach me that I need to get rid of, I would come from a perspective of collaboration, a sense of harmony. Sometimes we meet people and right away there's an instant kind of sense of synergy or connection. And we don't need to be following the ego's dictates, which is always just judging whether they would make a good partner or something like that. It's always trying to put people into boxes. The ego's only one question is, how will this serve me? In kind of a very individual, kind of narcissistic way, because the ego is trying to collect witnesses for itself and protect itself in the unconscious mind. But I like it where we can start the dialogue of like, this is what we're doing right now. You wrote to me one time and said, hey, I'd like you to come on my show. And we just had the best time. It's illuminating. There's a joy. There's a synergy. It's like we're being used in a very helpful way to extend another way of looking at the world in a very practical way for people who believe different things or seem to reflect different beliefs. We're just like, oh, let's come to that experience. And it's a collaboration. I have always looked at the world and relationships in terms of collaborations.
Yeah.
If we're waking up to God, and I'm convinced that that is what's going on here, that's really what's going on,
Yep.
then I'm always looking for collaborators. I was so busy the last several days that I was getting emails, texts, messages, Facebook Messenger messages, and everything. And then, like with your email, I said, "Yeah, how about next week?" Because this was on the weekend, and then here we are. And to me, this joy. I've had such a wonderful day. I've had like 4 or 5 conversations. This one's a podcast, but the others were just conversations. All of them joyful, all of them with lots of love and laughter, all of them very uplifting, because I'm interested in the collaborative nature of
Yep.
how can this serve the whole. And I think from the ego, it's not interested in the whole at all. It doesn't even believe there is a whole. It's just, how will this personally benefit me? And it's seeing everything in terms of what personal benefits and things like that. And that's just so tiny. It's like, what would be the fun of that? It's boring. It's very closed down, contracting. It doesn't feel good. It doesn't even feel good. So I think I would tell anybody who's interested in a relationship, start with the idea of connection, collaboration, that it will be a joint mutual effort in blessing the whole, in bringing a gift to the whole human race. When you come from that perspective, that's why we love Jesus and Buddha. That's why we love Gandhi. That's why we love Ramana Maharshi, all these great mystics and saints, because even if it's our neighbor, we love them because if they're generous of heart and they're into that open-mindedness and collaboration, how beautiful. It's just a gift.
It is beautiful. And my answer for anyone that's watching this and wants to enter a holy relationship and that is more sacred, study the course. All the answers are there. It will replace, if you're ready, yeah, there are great books that can be the bridges out there. They're your books. I just finished writing a book myself. It's a new version of the love languages that is based on much more higher consciousness than the old version of the love languages that is about take the trash out or buy me a gift and I'll feel loved. I felt the need for a more advanced language of love. So I just finished writing a book. So here we are creating bridges, collaborating together. But ultimately, I think for the people who are ready for the course is it's the last teaching you're really gonna need, because all the answers are truly there. Somebody just asked, what's the name of your Better 5 Love Language book? It's not out yet. As soon as the book is out, make sure to follow me on Facebook. You will know. But the name of the book is What Would Love Say? I will just share that for now. What Would Love Say? Which is based on psychology, but very much the energy of the book is the energy of Course in Miracles. So
yeah, that's so beautiful. And the title of this YouTube and Facebook, whatever video comes out, your Alex Gill is right there mentioned in the title, and then her website is it alexgillcoaching.com. That's it. It's there in the description, so you can find it there. And it's been a beautiful week of Alex's for me. I have had a string of Alexes within the last couple of weeks, including this week, a singer who was from Barcelona, Spain, was touring Mexico, and he invited me and some friends to come to his concert with strobe lights and colors and everybody swaying in the love vibe. And then I got to do a nice talk with him at La Casa de Milagros. His name was Alex, and then I said, and then Alex has contacted me, Alex Gill. So I'm having a glorious time with all the Alexes that the Holy Spirit is sending, and that's fantastic too. We just say, great, I welcome it.
yes, David, this has been such a beautiful, a holy collaboration with you, and you are a role model to me. I follow you an inspiration. So I am so thrilled to be collaborating with you, my brother. And thank you for everybody that have been present, sending comments. I'm very, very grateful. Thank you for this dialogue.
Beautiful. Thank you, Alex. And thank you, all of us, everyone that tuned in.
Thank
You know,
you.
I see we've got a bunch online and we love it. So until the next time, God bless you.
God bless you.